Right now, somewhere, in the world, someone is cold. And if that person is you, the solution is almost embarrassingly easy. You raise a thermostat. You put on a jacket that was engineered in a lab to trap heat with almost no effort on your part. You step inside, and the cold simply stops being a problem. It barely registers as a decision. It is one of the most solved problems in modern life. It was not always like this. For most of human history, cold was not an inconvenience. It was one of the primary forces standing between your ancestors and the next generation, and the story of how humans learned to survive. It is also, in a strange and direct way, the story of how humans became who they are. Let us start with the scale of the problem. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa in a climate that did not require heavy, cold weather's adaptation. But at some point, likely somewhere between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago, groups of humans began moving into regions with far colder climates, parts of Europe and Asia, places that, particularly during glacial periods, could reach temperatures the human body was never built to handle, unaided. This was not a small technical challenge. It was, according to many researchers who study this period, one of the most demanding environmental transitions our species ever attempted. Human beings, biologically speaking, are a tropical species. We have relatively little body hair, a metabolism not particularly optimized for generating internal heat compared to other cold-adapted mammals, and a body plan built for dissipating heat rather than retaining it. Left completely unprotected, a human being can develop dangerous hypothermia in cold water within minutes, and even in cold air. Sustained exposure without protection is genuinely life-threatening. And yet, humans not only survived in some of the coldest environments on Earth, they eventually thrived there. So, how did they do it? Most people would probably say fire, and fire mattered enormously. But fire alone does not explain how humans spread across environments where temperatures regularly dropped far below freezing. The real answer appears to be something more specific and, in some ways, more surprising. Clothing. Archaeologist and evolutionary biologist Ian Gilligan, who has spent years researching the origins of clothing, has argued that the development of tailored, insulating clothing may have been one of the most significant technological shifts in human history, arguably as consequential as the control of fire itself. But here is the detail that makes this genuinely interesting. We cannot directly see ancient clothing. Cloth disappears. Hide decomposes. They do not fossilize the way bone or stone does. So, how do researchers know anything about it at all? This is where the evidence becomes almost detective-like. One of the most compelling lines of evidence comes not from Wayne's clothing itself, but from something almost invisible. Lice. Geneticists studying the evolutionary history of human body lice, a species that, unlike head lice, depends specifically on clothing to survive because it lives and lays eggs in fabric rather than directly on skin, have used genetic analysis to estimate when body lice diverged from head lice as a distinct lineage. Multiple studies, including work led by researchers such as Mark Stoneking, have placed this divergence at roughly 170,000 years ago, though estimates vary, and the method carries real uncertainty. If the reasoning holds, it suggests that structured clothing, something substantial enough to sustain a separate parasite population, may have existed far earlier than most direct archaeological evidence can confirm, which means one of our best clues about a defining human technology comes from an insect. The physical evidence, once it does appear, adds important detail: bone needles with eyelets, allowing for genuine sewing rather than simply draping. Hides over the body appear in the archaeological main record by around 40,000 years ago at multiple sites across Eurasia. This shift from wrapping skins loosely around the body to fitting and stitching them into tailored garments appears to correspond closely with successful, sustained human habitation of the coldest regions our species reached during the Ice Age. But declothing was likely never the whole story. Anthropologist Rachel Kaspari, among others, who study the archaeological and skeletal record of this period, has pointed to something else that becomes more visible in colder, harsher environments: evidence of older individuals surviving well past their reproductive years in environments where a single mistake, inadequate clothing, poor judgment about ice conditions, missing the signs of an approaching storm, could be fatal. The accumulated knowledge of older group members may have mattered more than it did in milder climates, knowing which materials held heat best, knowing how to read a changing sky, knowing where a group had sheltered successfully before. This kind of knowledge could not be improvised quickly. It had to be remembered, taught, and passed down. In other words, surviving the cold may not have depended only on technology. It may have depended on the accumulated, transmitted knowledge of the group, which is to say, on culture itself. There is a broader pattern worth sitting with here. Environments that are actively hostile to unprepared humans may paradoxically have rewarded exactly the traits that make humans distinct from other animals: the ability to plan ahead, to teach and learn deliberately across generations, and to modify the body's relationship with its environment through invented technology rather than through biological adaptation alone. Cold did not simply threaten early humans. It may have helped select for some of the very capacities that define human intelligence today. This connects, if loosely, to something that still shows up in you: the specific, almost primal relief of stepping from freezing air into a warm, enclosed space. The comfort of being wrapped in something soft and insulating, the instinct on a cold night to want to be close to another person rather than alone. These responses are shaped by countless factors, including your own personal history and culture, and it would be an overreach to claim any single feeling in you today is a direct, unbroken inheritance from a specific ancestor on an ice age night. But the deep pattern is worth noticing. Regardless, your species survived some of the harshest cold on the planet, not primarily through biological toughness, but through invention, cooperation, and the deliberate transmission of knowledge across generations. Tonight, if it is cold where you are, and you put on another layer without even thinking about it, you are performing an action with a history far older and far stranger than it appears. A history that runs through a needle, a scrap of hide, and improbably a parasite that had nowhere left to live except inside the first clothes humans ever made.